We begin part two of our look at migration with this topic of migration selectivity. Migration selectivity is the tendency for certain types of people to migrate. The graphic on your screen shows when people are more likely to migrate during their lifetime. And you can see here that one of our factors in migration selectivity is age. You are most likely to move between the age of 18 and 30. Now, that doesn't mean you are going to move. It doesn't mean that you can't move before and after this period. But during this time, people are most likely to move. You may ask yourselves, why is that? Well, one, you are probably the most independent that you'll be in your life. Between the ages of 18 and 30, many of you are single. Many of you are pursuing an education and then pursuing a career after that education. Perhaps you decide to start a family or you have a significant other, but you're the most economically and physically mobile during this time. Perhaps your parents are still in good health before they reach an elderly age. So between the ages of 18 and 30, you're the most mobile. Another factor that's going to predict someone's likelihood to move is their level of education. And someone with a higher education is more likely to move a greater distance. And the reason for this is that through education, you're exposed to more people, more ideas, more opportunities, new places. So the higher level of education is going to suggest the higher likelihood that you're going to move and that you're going to move a greater distance. That being said, a process or a factor known as distance decay comes into play, where people are still likely going to move closer to home than farther away. So if we have 10 people that are graduating from Towson, you're more likely to move because of your higher education. But at the same time, if you're Maryland residents or New Jersey or New York or Virginia or PA residents, you're more likely going to stay within this area, within 100 miles or so, than you would to go to the West Coast or go down to the Southeast or go to Texas or Chicago. So distance decay also comes into play, that you're more likely to move closer to home than farther away. And also migration streams. Migration streams are established when a group of people move and set up a receiving community in a new place. So many of you who do decide to move far away may do so knowing someone on the other end already. So you may say, I want to move to Los Angeles or San Francisco after graduation. What facilitates that move is having somebody on the other end. And we see this quite often with immigration, where immigrant enclaves come into play. Immigrant enclaves provide a place of similar culture, similar language. Perhaps you know the same people or you know the same towns. Having that comfort of home in a new place through the establishment of migration streams is really important. Migration streams create what are known as counter streams or migration counter streams. So what we'll find with migration is a series of individuals moving back and forth between the same communities, as noted in the Alan Marcus article on Brazilian migration to the United States, how these Brazilian migration streams established communities in both Massachusetts and Georgia, and they also created counter streams as people and culture and ideas moved back and forth between destinations along what we could call a migration highway. So the idea of migration streams introduces us to immigration. And immigration, again, one of my favorite topics, and really a human geography topic that's critically important in the world today. About 3% of the global population falls into this immigrant classification. And remember that immigrant means a migrant that crosses international boundaries. An author suggested that immigrants are the raw material of cultural globalization, a topic that we previously explored. The idea that as people move around the world, they bring their culture with them. They bring their customs, their traits, their behavior, their ideas with them. And as our world continues to globalize, as we become more interconnected, it's immigrants and people moving around the world that's reforming and evolving our cultural landscapes. The graphic on your screen shows the past and predicted percentage of our population that can be categorized as immigrants. You'll notice that over 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, we reached our peak when the highest percentage of people in the United States was foreign born, higher than at any time. Today, we are nearing that peak again. As 2020, we estimate we're going to be at 14%, but within the next decade, we expect to be at our all-time high when it comes to foreign-born population. So what this means is not just that more people from other places are going to equal a higher percentage of our population. It means that our culture is going to continue to evolve and adapt. Our polycultural society and landscapes will reflect these migration streams. The image on your screen was one I took several years ago in Chinatown in Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan, home to Chinatown, home to Little Italy, home to a number of ethnic enclaves. Through immigration, our cultural landscapes, they reflect these migration streams. The images on the bottom right of the screen were taken from the Alan Marcus article, where on the bottom, far bottom right, you see the Stop and Shop market in Brazil. Stop and Shop is a big supermarket in Massachusetts. So as individuals moved along this migration stream, not only did they transform the cultural landscape in Massachusetts, like you see the Brazilian steakhouse on the bottom center, we also found cultural landscape changes happening in Brazil as Brazilians went back to their sending communities and brought ideas, brought practices. So what this also suggests is that there's enough people in that sending community in Brazil that the Stop and Shop is a recognizable brand, a recognizable name. So both the origin and the destination are impacted through immigration. Again, we often just see the destination here in the United States and the receiving end, but it's important to note that these migration streams are very strong and that the origin or the sending community is also impacted. Bringing back a term we've discussed in length thus far, syncretism, right? We're seeing syncretism occur. The bottom center picture, again, you see Brazilian steakhouse on the right, and you see the Portuguese version on the left. There's the Stop and Shop market, right? Again, syncretism. Two forces coming together and creating something new. Chinatown in New York City. What we find to be the case in a lot of our receiving communities in the destination are different forms of segregation, and that's something that we're going to look at as we explore the different waves of immigration. The segregation creates ethnic clustering, which can serve as both a positive and a negative towards the immigrant community. In a positive, it creates immediate opportunities, immediate sense of place and belonging. The negative is that any type of segregation, one group is going to be limited. So as you're a new person in a new place, there's often comfort in these receiving communities. But long term, they could be very limiting places if the segregation is dictated by discrimination from the outside majority population. The result of all this movement, a topic that was covered in the Marcus readings, called transnational landscapes. Transnational landscapes. Cultural landscapes that are made up by cultures from multiple countries. In this case, we see Chinatown, where Chinese immigrants early on collided with a Native American population and created a new landscape. In the bottom, we see the transnational landscape evolve through the syncretism of Brazilian and American culture. When we look at immigration and we look at the individuals moving, again, this builds on that idea of migration selectivity. The characteristics of an immigrant, again, younger, right? That age is a key characteristic of predicting migration. They're more educated, again, building on those migration selectivity concepts. They're usually an economic pull. So with immigrants, it's usually economics. Sure, we sometimes have family through chain migration. We sometimes have education. But education, again, primarily leading towards that economic pull factor, economic opportunity. And we also have what's known as a bipolar distribution. Bipolar distribution means that our immigrants that are arriving in the United States today tend to be at the highest level of education and income or at the lower levels of education and income. What we're lacking in the United States today is a strong middle class, upper middle class cohort of immigrants. Again, we see very wealthy, highly educated immigrants moving to America for great opportunities. We also see more working class, not poverty stricken, but working class, lower middle class immigrants arriving for again primarily economic opportunities. Reactions to immigration, they're immigration can be a very polarizing topic, to say the least. I like this graphic on the screen that shows the Pilgrims arriving at Plymouth Rock and the pretended reaction by the Native Americans in the area. Again, when you think about the rhetoric and the opinions surrounding immigration today, it can be a very polarizing topic. What I aim to do is help us better understand why somebody is making the move that they're making. Why are they doing what they're doing? Again, examining those push and pull factors, examining the characteristics of that person through migration selectivity, understanding what types of barriers to movement are in place, and if they're reasonable, if they're just, if they're discriminatory, right? Those are all things that evolve out of understanding migration. The political reactions to migration have changed over time. Immigration regimes usually fall into those political decision makers who put policies in place. What we find is a bit of a pendulum swing between xenophobia, or the fear of outsiders or promoting fear of other, and embracing. So what I'm going to show you are 4 quotes, and I ask you to pause to look at the quotes. These quotes come from the same political party, because I don't want to play party politics, this one versus that one, but they show you how the sentiment towards immigrants has changed over time or continues to change. The pendulum swings one way towards xenophobia and back towards embrace. The first quote is from President Hoover, and again, I encourage you to pause for a minute and read what President Hoover thinks or thought of Italian immigrants in the United States. The second quote comes from Donald Trump during his candidacy, and similar rhetoric has been pursued through his term as president. And again, both of these presidents, same party, promote different views of xenophobia, fear of outsiders, not a positive look at immigration. On the other hand, we have presidents from the same party that have embraced immigration. The first quote is from Woodrow Wilson. Again, I encourage you to pause for a moment to read this. And the second quote comes from President George W. Bush in the early 2000s. Again, the pendulum swings. We have policies and we have sentiment that go both ways with immigration. Now, the sentiment is not necessarily popular sentiment. It's the sentiment of an immigration regime. This graphic may take a moment to help you, or may take a moment to better understand what we're looking at. But we're going to go through this graphic, this infographic, and we're going to break up our immigration past into 4 different waves. And we'll examine what happened during these waves. Who was involved, meaning the individuals and where they were coming from, our primary migration streams. We're going to look at different policies that were in place. We're going to look at how the population of the United States was affected. And then we'll wrap up by looking at where we are with immigration today. So we're going to look at these 4 waves of immigration: the colonial period, old wave, new wave, and ethnic kaleidoscope. You'll notice how the graphic pinches under where I have Great Migration. So we'll see how internal migration took hold during this period. And again, we'll look at each of these waves, each of these periods of migration, and we'll try to better understand what did the policy or what did the political regime say? How did these groups organize when they arrived? And where were they coming from and why?